Welcome to Burlington and Beyond, our first show in the year 2014. We're glad you could all make it. We have a regular panelist here tonight, Pat Marino on my left, and Paul Gerard. I'm Larry Way, and we have a special guest tonight. His name is Ernie Zablontski, and he's come to talk to us about some of the town issues. Ernie, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Happy to be here.
I was wondering if you could give a little bit of an introduction to yourself, a little bit of your background in Burlington.
I'm a resident of Burlington since 1971. I came here to work at Stunner Webster, which is no longer a thriving engineering company, but at that time it was. I used to commute from Burlington to Boston on a daily basis, completely familiar with the problems that occurred at that time, but had no idea that it's so much easier than it is now. It's getting worse, and among the issues that consume us locally, and me to some extent, is the traffic issues that you have to deal with, and that's not only political, it's a day-to-day misery check on how one has to negotiate their lives here. I guess among the things that we are interested in doing to see if we can make it a little bit better.
Well, I mentioned before, I shared with the audience before, the reason I got into town politics was because I was moving here from Waltham to a nice little community, not much traffic, and boy, how things changed very quickly.
And then you found out that Waltham is always compared to Burlington and vice versa, and we're competition to see who can have more jobs.
I think that's it, or more malls right now. I guess Waltham is trying to build up there also. I was hoping to get away from that, but this is where we are. That's why I came in. Ernie, you've been one of the more knowledgeable people in town that I've had the opportunity to meet. And so I was wondering if you could kind of go over the changes that you've seen.
Well, the changes are interesting. If you look at them over the 4 decades or more that we've been here, there's been significant improvements. The presence of Leahy Clinic is clearly an asset, and it's nice to be able to go there at 3 o'clock in the morning when you have to go. And it's very quick to get there so that you don't have to go all the way to Boston, for example. The number of people that live here is not that different from 4 decades ago. I think the population was about 22,000 when we first moved here. Yeah. And it's gone up and down, but there's really no surprise in that because there really isn't any land in Burlington to build on, especially since the vacant land, which is far less than a lot of communities have. We're about 4% conservation land. I think quite a few other, like Lexington, is over 8%. And the number of things that, or the number of areas that you can build grassroots style are basically all gone. So one wouldn't anticipate an increasing population other than increased densification, multifamily dwellings, more apartment buildings, more condos and things of that nature. And we've had quite a few of those added since we've been living here. And I think had it not been for the efforts of some people on the planning board way back then and various groups of town meeting members trying to maintain Burlington as a single family home community, it is quite likely that there would have been a great deal of changes, far more than have occurred. And I don't think that if you compare the community at that and this time, it's just that there's a lot more people working here and a lot more daily visitors now than there used to be. I keep on remembering that the police department, I thought, was about 7 police officers when we moved here. We have quite a few more now.
And what year was that again? 7 police officers?
1971. I think it was 7 or actual police officers. There may have been 2 or 3 other employees in the department at that time. And I may not be right about it, but that's the impression we had. I don't think I visited the police department when it's in the current engineering office or the annex to the town hall. It didn't occupy very many places, and I guess they're still in a place where they need better room. constantly looking for it, and that's one of our future problems, where to find the place to build a proper police station.
About how many police do we have now?
I think there's 60, or the total manning of the department, civilians.
60?
I believe it's 65 if you look at all of the people who are employed in the department, and that includes non-police officers, civilian assistants.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That is quite a bit. Wow. We are land poor. I've heard that many times. So the only possibility, and I see it happening, is people in construction looking for bargain single-family homes that they can turn into little palaces that sell for a lot of money. I've had it happen in my particular neighborhood, and I've noticed it happening a lot. And I guess that's the only possible kind of growth. I guess the real question is that what we want? Do we want more growth?
Well, that's among the questions that come before various town meeting members at the Land Use Committee and before the Planning Board. When somebody wants to have cluster housing, for example, we had a discussion that lasted several years. At the south end of Wheeler Road, there was it used to be called the Thorstenson land, and it's in a well, as it were, or sharp valley. And the initial suggestion was that the developer wanted to build 90 housing units on that piece of land, which was about 15.3 acres. The local residents didn't think one should be built, and there were quite a few people who thought that that shouldn't. There was a discussion that came down to 63, and then it came down to 40, and then eventually it settled at about 32. But they're still building them, and when you go by there, since it's attached to the Mary Cummings property, which by law we hope is going to remain open space and a natural park, as it were, the people who are concerned about conservation and the integrity of the Mary Cummings Trust were among the people who thought that there was far too much building in that particular area because it was abutting a particular sensitive, environmentally sensitive section of that land. And as you start looking into it in greater detail, it happens to sit on part of the land that is used by rainwater to recharge our well system.
Yeah.
And any additional development, the Burlington Mall sits on it too. So do many of the buildings along Middlesex Turnpike, all the way into Lexington Center. It's something that we need to be critically aware of, because that water still supplies something like 45% of the water that the community uses. But it's also part of the surface water feeding system that we store in Mill Pond. That kind of complication is not necessarily looked at by too many people, but if you look at the water resource that we have to protect and the land resource, additional building is really not something that's going to be comfortable for those of us who have been living here for a long time. It's going to have an impact on both of those resources.
Yeah. I'm very happy that you're here, and I'm sure that we all are, as Larry indicated, because I don't think that the community is even remote. Most of the community is remotely aware of the problems in the excessive growth. I call it excessive growth because I think we're just beyond the point where we are. We were, up until probably not too long ago, we were still a town. We're called a town, but as you indicated earlier, that we're on the verge of being a serious city. And I personally don't want to see a city. I think we've grown enough. One question that, if I may, my wife and I have talked about, possibly because we're getting on in years, but there are a lot of people. cemetery space is at a premium, and I guess a little bit of investigation that we've done in terms of asking the selectmen, I guess it was in particular, about the possibility of reserving space for people who have been here in the town 20 years, 30 years, whatever. I would think that they would have some priority with regard to, but it's my understanding, I don't know if this is a question that is, but when you brought up space.
When it's one of the issues about land use in town, and it has been a topic of concern for quite a few people. The Department of Public Works has done some interesting things to basically expand the space available in the existing cemeteries. There's been discussions of locating additional cemetery space to the west of Route 3 on what's called the landlocked forest. There have
Ernie, if
been,
you don't mind, I think covering the space for cemeteries, we'd cover another night. But what
I warned you, you ask a question, I will
I'm
go
sorry,
where the
yeah.
question
You're
was
absolutely
rather
right.
than
You're
what you want to
absolutely
talk
right.
about.
Go ahead.
Well,
No.
you were what I thought was very important too. Is anyone looking into is our resources being stretched? The water, the ability to get to dispose of all that's being used, especially with the increase in restaurants, stores, commerce.
That's an issue that for every application for a new restaurant, a new commercial building, a new development, the issue of supplying water, adequate sewage capability, utility deliveries, all of that is thoroughly discussed. To date, I know of no concern about being able to get sufficient water supplies or anything else. There's always a constraint on whether or not you have enough land to satisfy all the interests in doing, and the land interests include expanding recreational, conservation capability, the cemetery space, no adequate space for putting town facilities like a new fire hall that is required on the western part of town, an adequate room for expanding the Council on Aging to be able to satisfy the interest of the community for senior services. Each one of those are basically looking for additional land, and there is no additional land to be obtained. So it's going to be going forward, a continuing argument about what the best utilization of what resources we have to satisfy the greatest number of people. It will be a continuing discussion, I think, for a long time.
But there still is building going on in town right now as we speak.
Because it has been permitted. I mean, there's something like 4 million square feet of development that's permitted that has yet to be built and will be built, and that translates to another 4,000 or 5,000 people who will have to fill those buildings when they're built at Northwest Park and other places. And that means a great many more people who will be traveling Route 3 and 128 and Middlesex Turnpike to work and shop and eat in Burlington.
And one of the concerns I've had too, what we've been told is that, well, we need all this development because of the increased tax revenues, but for some reason it seems like each year the taxes are continuing to increase on residents. So where is the benefit that we're getting from continued development of whatever the little space we have left?
That's an interesting question, and I've tried to look at it from a different perspective several different ways now. I don't think anybody can really give you an answer on it, but in an attempt to answer a similar question recently, I did an evaluation of our tax bases for 4 different towns. To me, the easiest way to look at it is what are the costs of these services. We can all agree that the municipal services are critical and necessary. That's not an issue. What is at issue is what it costs each of us. So if we take our annual budget, the most recent ones I could find for Burlington, Woburn, Wilmington, and Lexington, and you divide it by the population, you get a capital or per capita cost of all of those services. In Burlington's case, it costs each one of us who live in Burlington $4,530 for the municipal services. In Lexington, those same services cost $5,100. Wilmington, the cost is $4,000 for those same services. And in Woburn, it's $3,000. Now the population difference will affect it because obviously there's economies in scale. Woburn has the highest population, but Lexington's population is, almost, well, it's 31,300. It has by far the largest budget. Woburn's budget is almost the same as Burlington's budget, and it has 50% more people. How does this happen, and what are the differences that are included there? And if you looked at those numbers and only went that far, you would get the impression that there must be some serious waste in some places because it's the same basket of services.
Right.
But if you factor into it what it really costs us per person, that's the per person cost, but what do we pay for that? Well, in Burlington's case, the residents pay approximately 40% of the tax bill. Our commercial neighbors pay the bulk of the remainder.
I see. Yeah.
So that $4,500 per person cost to taxpayers is actually closer to $2,000. And if you do that for each of the other towns in the neighborhood, you find that all of them have a lower cost as well but their fraction of commercial components in their tax revenues is significantly smaller percentage than Burlington's. We have a very attractive lowering that way. And if you think about the services that we get, of course you have to add the water bill to that, but when you have the water, sewer, the road maintenance, everything else that goes along with it, if you try to get those services on a private basis, you would not be able to get any of those services for $2,000 per person per year. And it's interesting, if you happen to have two people living in your house and you're paying roughly the average tax, your tax bill is pretty close to where I've been guessing at if you're a two-person home, but the average household in Burlington is 3. So the average household in Burlington does very well on this tax, and if you only go that far, you're going to be able to justify significant additional tax expenditures because we're doing a lot better than other communities.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a fair way to end it. So it's a little bit like peeling an onion. If you're going to do statistical analysis, you can do one level and get one answer. You go a little deeper, it gets to be another answer. And if you get down to the nitty-gritty, you're going to find all kinds of reasons why you should be doing something different than doing statistical analysis. Because you're going to get too many solid bases for varying answers that don't really compute. The thing that bothers me about this little peremptory analysis that I looked at what our costs are is that it really doesn't tell us anything about what each individual department costs. Now I know, and you know, that the school budget portion of our budget is considerably higher than many other communities in the area, and it's comparatively higher by about 2% than the rest of the town departments. So if I looked at each department on a comparative basis, I suspect that I will find that maybe the DPW cost per person or cost per taxpayer in each of the towns is pretty close together. The schools are not. I haven't done those things. Nobody's asked me to do them, and I don't want to get embroiled in too many details. But until you go through that kind of thorough analysis, you're not going to find out who's paying too much for a given service. Too much over the average of what that costs. I think at least from my point of view, we should be striving for something like the average, not too high and not too low, because if you're really curtailing the amount of money that you're providing for some of these services, they're really not going to be available for enough people. And the same thing, it's easy to spend more. Ultimately, we're consumers of these services, and when we go shopping, we pick and choose between something we like and what the price is.
Right.
And there's no real mechanism available for us to do that when it comes to our purchasing our local services. It's set along one set of criteria. And as we were talking before, the thing where this all breaks down is, what is the affordability? There is no real thought on property taxes as to how people can actually afford to pay that bill. The Metropolitan Planning Council, in its study of the 110 towns around Boston, about what the future trends are going to be, et cetera, among them are the costs of housing and adequate housing, the availability of employment, what economic development activities there are going to be, et cetera. They have a criteria which states that if a household is spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs, then it is a housing cost stressed budget. In other words, any
Spending too
additional
much.
costs, they really are running short of money for health care, for
Yeah.
food, and for vacations are out of the question, and things of that nature. In Burlington, we have 37% of our households that
That are above that 30%?
are above that 30% housing cost.
Wow.
Now, there is one town in our area of 9 towns for the Northwest Metropolitan Planning Group. Stoneham has 42%. But other towns in our area have less than 30%. When I first heard that, I assumed that a reasonable number, if you look at homeless statistics and things of that nature, if that number was down around 5 to 10%, then I would have considered that a reasonable number. I think anything over that is already getting to be unreasonable. The fact that we get 37% of the households, and we have roughly 8,000 households in town, so we're talking about a large number of people who, when they look at tax increases, it's not an issue of affordability. They already can't afford them. And that's a large number of people who basically their concerns are not being met, except maybe by the circuit breaker in state income tax. And fortunately, they can apply for that even if they have no income, and I imagine there's quite a few of those people in that 37% of the households.
So we have about 37% of the households who are housing challenged or
Housing
have
cost-
difficulty meeting their housing
costs.
Basic, just housing.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, that means the tax increases that was just passed by the town of 3%, I believe it was, for
Make something that's hard even harder. And as a policy, it may be cruel to say this, if we vote for those tax increases, basically we're voting to help people make the decision to leave their homes. And we're
Yeah.
talking primarily people in your age group and mine.
Right.
And that's really not something that I would like to be part of, that forcing people out of their homes earlier than they might want to go, because the least housing costs that many of those people have are in their current homes. Doing anything, moving away to anything else, is going to cost them more money.
More money.
Does anyone believe we're almost at a breaking point where the citizens would have to do something?
I get
Pass
a
something
picture
on their
we're
own.
beyond the breaking point.
Seeing
And,
it's too late. I mean, even though they've also decided to raise the budget as much as last year, which causes the 3% tax increase, it looks like we're not stopping as a town. We're continuing on the same track. Either the town doesn't know how to get off of it, or they're just unwilling to.
Is there anyone that's complaining about this? Are we the only ones that are looking at it?
Well, there's always concerns about taxes and what's fair and what's appropriate. It's easy on a case-by-case or service-by-service basis to come up with and justify expenditures. Just as we go shopping, I don't care what it is to shopping. If you shop like I do at a grocery store, I don't look at prices. I just keep up, and I'm always surprised at the size of the bill. I got what I wanted, but I'm paying a lot more for it than I thought I should be. Well, it's basically the same thing here. There has been this policy for quite a few years that we really don't want to cut services. That's a laudable thing, particularly if you happen to be among the people in our age group that require a significant amount of services. I know that one of our town meeting members was just absolutely thrilled to be able to see the EMT people come because her husband was in great difficulty. And how fast they responded, how quickly they dealt with the situation and saved her husband's life, etc. at that time. And it's nice to be able to have that. But it also costs a fair amount of money. And that's where it's necessary to start looking at how much we're paying for that service compared to other communities. Are we out of line with how much we're doing? And I don't think we do that. And as far as I'm concerned, since we're the consumer here, and we're the purchasing these services, we are the ones that are responsible for looking at how much we want, not a various board or a few people who may have an entirely different economic perspective on some of these things than the bulk of people who need these services may have. It's not an easy thing to determine. You bring up an interesting thing, rate of increase. I looked at the rate of increases when I was picking these things from the websites of each of the town. We have a 4% increase over the last 5 years. 4% a year, roughly
Every
speaking.
year.
So it's on a cumulative basis, it's 22, 23%. In Woburn,
So during this economy, that's significant. Most people, they're lucky if they're still stayed the same. We've got 1%.
going
people's
back
salaries
to the
haven't
issue
gone
of
up that much.
affordability, in this same period, the town's median income has gone down 1% up to 2012. In the last 2 years, it has been increasing, depending upon how you count it and which state statistics you look at. But if you assign a 1% increase per year, you'll be lucky, and basically you're describing two curves. And when one trend is increasing at a 3% faster rate over a period of time than the other, you
1%.
have very divergent curves.
Yeah.
They eventually get to a point where they're totally unsustainable.
Yeah.
So how long does it have to go before you have a crisis? Detroit went for a long period of time before they went bankrupt because they hid from the fact. And I think the time to correct those trends is when it's comfortable to trend, not when you have some bankruptcy court telling you that
So
you can no longer afford these things.
I gather what you're saying is that we have a projected 3 to 4% increase for next year, or that's
That's
what's
correct in the
being
budget,
asked.
yeah.
Yes.
And we are already above and beyond statistically, just noting that 37% of the population, the homes are struggling.
Well, that's
with-
one issue. And the other issue that Larry brings up is really what the income level is of the entire town.
Yeah.
And if you look at the average income, it's not increasing very rapidly.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, if you look at statistics, if you pick the numbers correctly, you can make them prove almost anything you want.
Right.
It's not appropriate to look only at the last 5 years. You probably have to go back 20 years to see what the trends were. And over that period of time, you can consistently see that we've had a pretty good time as purchasers of community services. And we've been very fortunate over that period of time. But over the last 5 years, it's not been so fortunate, and the costs have been growing more rapidly now than they ever have in the past.
And just to repeat, Ernie, our income went down as a population, our or overall household income as a town?
If you look at statistics from the state for the median household income for each of the towns that we've been talking about, there is a flat spot that starts at 2008, actually dips in 2011, and it starts going up again. I have no idea but Burlington again was fortunate in that because our unemployment rate didn't change very much. It was around 6%, 6.2%. It was among the best in the county and in the state. Again, when you make those comparisons, you can't come up with any conclusion other than we're doing a lot better than many other places.
But
that doesn't mean to say we can't do better.
Yeah.
It sounds like what it does mean also, if the average household income, our household income is going down, then we need to start, but the town, they're projecting that's going to continue to increase at 4%. We were told last year we got to have at least 4% because of the fiscal cliff and for many other reasons, possible cutbacks. Well, this year we didn't have any of those warnings. Talking about it, some of the town Ways and Means meetings. No real worry, but still they want 4%. And so I'd like to ask the group here, what can we do to stop that? Does anybody have any idea? Just one suggestion that I would think of. I'm hearing a mantra that, oh, we can't cut services. Not that I'm looking to cut services, but I got to believe there can't be some efficiencies found in looking or re-examining the services to make it better, more effective,
Well,
and less costs.
one point that addresses that, if there are 38,000 people in Woburn getting that basket of services, and I don't hear too many cries and screams from people I know who live in Woburn, and their budget is roughly the same as ours, then the question comes, why are we paying so much more for that same basket of services? What is the quality of the service that is so significantly different that causes us to spend that much more? It's not a small difference between the two.
In effect, it's a matter of looking carefully at
what the reasons are.
Yeah, and why it is costing us more for the same services that another community, Woburn in this instance, is getting.
And it's not immediately obvious, as if just looking at the numbers that I've been talking about, it's not immediately obvious that we in fact are spending too much. But it is obvious that we're spending a lot more than we are earning, and we're not unusual in that area. There's been a 40, 50, well, back to 1967, conscientious effort on the part of the private sector to reduce pensions, reduce benefits, reduce salaries. And at that time, there was a significantly higher median income for the average worker in the private sector than there was in the public sector. And some of the things that were done to make it attractive for people to work in the public sector at that time are now beginning to cost us a great deal of money.
Yeah.
So fundamentally that seems to me to be the reason why people are talking about changing benefit programs, pension programs, etc. in the public sector now, because it's already been discarded in the private sector. We're going through a period where I think the average government worker now, the median income is above the median income of, and again, it just depends on whether how large a government sector you take. It doesn't look very attractive if we have 1/6 of the population earning more than, I think among politicians who have addressed this, I think even our former Governor Romney mentioned it comes down to a basic issue of fairness. In my mind, the median income for the private sector worker shouldn't be any different than the public sector worker. It was in the past, it's been corrected, it's been overcorrected, and now we need to seek reasonable ways of bringing it into balance again.
Isn't this a national issue as well? I mean,
Absolutely.
I hear it in
Yes.
so many different ways.
It's a national issue, a state issue, and it's a local issue.
Yeah.
But really it starts with the local issue because it's based on the least or the most regressive tax that we have to pay, which is the property tax. It is totally blind to the ability to pay.
When you hear about some of these unfunded liabilities, that basically pensions and things, that communities or states or whatever will be unable to pay.
In the private sector, it was easily dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
You declare bankruptcy, you didn't get any retirement pay, and it was over.
Right.
I happened to work for one of two companies in the country that had a retirement program that was not only fully funded, but overfunded. And it eventually went out of, it chose to go bankrupt or to dissolve itself rather than give up the ability to continue to fund its retirement obligations. A true family company. It paid attention to the employees rather than what was frequently done. A business manager would come in, look at this large pile of money and use it and say, we'll pay that, we'll fill those coffers later.
Yeah.
Two companies in the entire country that paid attention to that. That's not a very good record as far
No,
as I
it
can see.
It sounds like the way our Social Security system works now, right? The money isn't really there anymore in a separate system to...
But it is,
I heard
as
it-
I understand
Well,
it.
I didn't think it was.
It isn't an absolute separation, but I don't think it's rated anymore.
I don't know.
In general, as a town, we are taking care of those, the funding. And I think there's a lot of people who agree we need to increase that funding also, to
How,
make sure we keep our commitments.
yeah, how is that being dealt with is from the Ways and Means point of view? Among the things that I would be asking is that this is we have 850 employees in town. That's a very small number to look at as a group for either retirement or healthcare benefits or to self-fund anything. It would seem to me if, particularly on the healthcare issue, the unfunded liability there would be significantly less if they were part of a much larger group, like the state plans. In the past, I've heard the arguments that we can do better, but I don't know who it was better for. Certainly wasn't better for us because that liability keeps on growing. By us, meaning the purchaser of the services.
Is it unreasonable to ask by department those that have increased dramatically their request for funding so that it impinges upon the tax rate in some way or other? In other words, are there particular departments that have grown so much? I go back to why is Woburn, the department's costing less than comparative departments here in Burlington, and how are they better if they are? It's a confusing.
Again, it's a complicated issue, but you're right. The way the budget is presented and passed, it's basically department by department, frequently sub-line items that are gone through that Ways and Means determines is an acceptable budget, but the departments themselves come up with what they think they need. The school department budget grows at roughly 2% per year faster than
2%
there's
faster
2% per year faster
than the rest of
the town.
the town's budgets.
Wow.
So these numbers for Burlington would be significantly smaller if we used the same average increase year to year that occurs in all the departments save the school budget department. There were considerable number of additional hires over the last several years in the school department. And there has been a significant amount of state-dictated requirements on the school, local schools, related to special education. That sum, if I remember correctly, the special education budget in Burlington was around $8 million last year, and all of the rest of the students, the budget was something in the order of 42, 43, something like that. I know that there is an effort on the part of some state representatives for the state to look into this and again look at averaging, because for many small communities they simply can't afford that large a special education budget. It's also a very complicated subject to deal with, because just how far you should go. I've heard comments from a variety of people on one side that we're not spending nearly enough on such things, and other people say that basically it's providing a babysitter service and it shouldn't be done within the educational budget. How you actually come to an accommodation between those two views, I don't know, but I know that this definitely is not just a town issue, it's primarily a state issue.
And the state takes no consideration with regard to the community. They simply impose what the town, or they have a formula for determining what the town should be spending on special education.
And what special education needs are, who qualifies, etc. I think we have something like 100 or 105 students or something last year.
That require
special transportation, special care, special supervision.
Mm-hmm.
It may be a laudable objective, but it is a significant budgetary problem that probably should be, since it's a state regulation, be treated separately from the school budget. Now, we actually separate those things in our budget, but that doesn't necessarily help the total.
I think if we're looking to keep taxes under control, I think the school budget being the biggest is the one that's worth looking at the most for efficiencies. See if there's ways we could do things differently. Do we need to continue on the same path? And I hope we can seriously look at those issues, look a little bit more at how we're spending money on our kids, and if there isn't a more effective way to do so. The other thing I'd like to suggest too, and please give me your input on this too, if you've watched town meeting, almost everything gets passed. There needs to be a few more people who are on the housing challenge side, who knows that the taxes being raised again and again will affect their ability to live there. Those are the people who need to be speaking out, talking to their town meeting members, or better yet, running for town meeting.
Yeah.
Well, it's a, and I have a suggestion to make to the two of you, since you're interested in becoming town meeting members, that I think it's January 27th on Monday, and it's likely to be a relatively short meeting because there are not that many warrant articles. The only one that is likely to take a significant, well, there are three, the issue of fingerprinting and the door-to-door. There may be some significant discussion there, and there may be some discussion related to the zoning article as well. But if you attended the meeting, and the town meeting members have to sit in the center and they vote, but I do not think that citizens are set aside. If you happen to want to ask questions, you can raise your hand, stand up, and want to be recognized as a citizen to have your views
within the population.
Well, no, you'll be sitting outside, but there are times when citizens are, if not invited, wish to speak.
Okay.
And if on a particular item you have, I'm just suggesting this as a way to explore what it's going to be like for you. If you sit and listen, it's one thing. It's another thing to say, raise your hand and say you have a question or you have a point that you would like the body to consider before they vote.
And Ernie, let's talk to our visitors, our listeners, that this is a good idea for anybody who's interested in what's happening to the town monies and policies and even the land use. This is a good time to show up
An excellent suggestion.
It's a simple raising of the hand, and they'll eventually call on you. And we need all these voices, especially if it's going to be affecting our ability to live where we currently live.
Or if, for example, you're not recognized, just make sure that you have a town meeting member who's raising his hand, might be recognized, knows what point you'd like to make.
Yeah.
So get a surrogate to speak for you if you don't get it. And that's the key, I think, in citizen governance. You need to participate. If you don't, it's not citizen governance.
Right.
It works very well by and large, but it works far better if you have a lot of participants.
Yeah, that's true at so many different levels. It's, I mean, even in the, you know, even if you take it to the national level, one of the biggest complaints are people who simply don't turn out
Low voter turnout.
don't turn out to vote and don't care. I've heard it. And it unfortunately is true. I totally agree with you, Larry and Ernie. That is, people should be looking to get out and vote and get involved in what's going on. Try to understand the issues, because every individual, every vote is critical. It really is important.
And I think at the town, it's the easiest to get involved, because you can go down to where the decisions are
Yeah.
being made and voice your opinion to the committees.
Right.
You can watch the committees on TV, where state
Yeah.
committees, national committees, that's not going to be televised,
Yeah.
where the decisions are made and where they're formed.
What is the other, is there of the other monies that have to be laid out, the outlays, are there other parts of our town government that are exorbitantly expensive, more so than, or is growing at a
Another
rate?
one that is growing pretty quickly, but I haven't looked into it too much, but only to observe, because being in town government for just a few years, you don't get to look into everything. But the public safety departments are also rising relatively rapid compared to the rest of the town.
Public
And I'm not
safety.
quite sure yet, because we don't seem to have that many incidents where we would need to pay, we would need to have the increases.
Mm.
I welcome people to disagree with me, but it's something that is happening. If we're looking to keep expenses down, maybe there's opportunity where we're seeing those expenses being increased.
And that's another way that you can look at it. You could pick a specific department, and I know from a previous analysis that I did and shared with Ways and Means several years ago, and I came up with a surprise that about 80% of the towns in Massachusetts pay more for their public services than we do. And we also are in the group of people that have a higher median income than the average in Middlesex County, and much higher than the entire state as a whole. And if you extend it to the country, we actually pay, our public services are more efficiently provided to us in Massachusetts than most other states. We have fewer people working in public service in Massachusetts than as the average in the rest of the country.
Yeah.
Our public servants are paid better than the rest of the country, but the net result is, because of fewer people getting better paid, it's more efficiently provided than in many other states. That surprised me, and I think that trend continues. But as long as you end up with income flat and costs going up on a guaranteed basis, that doesn't last very long, that you're in a preferred position.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start looking at those kinds of numbers and start comparing departments, you pick similar communities. Our former town administrator was very big on making sure that he selected communities that he thought were close to what Burlington is. We didn't have the same kind of viewpoint. As far as I'm concerned, there's not a whole lot of difference between Wilmington and Burlington with the same population. There are 50% more area for them to provide services for. Their budget is considerably less than ours, and I think it's a very good question to ask. What's the difference? Are people happy there? So on. In the case of public service, I know that Braintree is bigger than Burlington. It has a mall. It has the same kind of large commercial entity. It's very similar to us, except that there may be about, I think Braintree's population is over 35,000 or in that neighborhood. But their public safety budget is about the same as ours. So again, the cost per person for each department service gets to be a useful indicator of what the true costs should be if you're looking for an average. But it gets to be dicey in our case because our daily population peaks out at about 150, 160. Both the fire department and police department basically have to prepare themselves to deal with a population at max. And there are times of the year when our daytime population is 150,000.
100 and what?
150,000.
150.
That's huge. Must
Yes.
be when the malls are full as well. I mean,
Well, yes, because you get that by we have 24,500 and there's 45, arguably 48,000 people working. So the in-place population approaches 70,000 in Burlington, assuming some people actually work in Burlington or leave town to work elsewhere. There's some movement in
And given the
populace.
construction that is underway or will
That-
soon be underway, that number is going to grow.
I think Northwest Park is looking at maybe an additional 5,000 to 10,000 people that might be working there. And considering the kinds of systems are being put in commercial development that's taking place there, Wegmans alone may be looking for an additional 10 to 20,000 customers a day. I think when they opened in Marlboro, Wegmans had 22,000 or 24,000 customers the first day. So if you divide that by 2 for the number of cars, assuming 2 people per car, an additional 12,000 cars per day on Middlesex Turnpike should be an entertaining traffic jam. That's just one.
It all happens
There's a great many
this
more.
summer.
There's a great many more that are going to be built, and there was a time when the Sun Microsystems it looks like a very nice office park. It was pretty close to empty, and it's totally full now.
Yeah.
And while it's full, there are still large blocks of acreage leveled where old buildings have been taken down, that there are prospective customers coming to fill those. And there will be apartment buildings, there will be many restaurants, there will be...
Oh, wait, isn't that the question that should be before us?
No, it's
at
not,
this-
because it's already permitted. It has been
All of
settled.
that?
It has been settled as to the overall intent. If you look at the plans that are already there, I was aware of them 5 years ago. They were permitted 5 years ago. They figure it will take 15 to 20 years for a complete build-out. But when it is finished, it's going to look a lot more like Brookline than Burlington, if you're familiar with Brookline.
Yes,
When
I
I
am.
when I got involved in the town politics, I realized it was too late. Everything's been signed.
It's
already
never
been
too
sold.
late, Larry.
That's true.
It's
It's
kinda
never
there.
too late.
But let me ask you this then, both Paul and Pat. Paul, what was your reason for wanting to get more involved in the town of Burlington?
Exactly. Go ahead.
a lot of the issues we're discussing now, just tax rates that seem to be going up, well, that don't keep in line with income increases. Basically, all the issues we're discussing here, just out of control growth, it seems like, as far as the town. I think one of the things that really bothered me was this overlay district where when you drive down Cambridge Street now, you've got these apartments that seem like they're 10 feet from the road. I really don't care for that at all. So basically, a lot of the issues we're discussing here is what is getting me involved.
Traffic, taxes.
Yes.
Again, looking more like Brookline
That's right.
than Burlington.
When I first,
And we're not necessarily consistent. While those buildings are very close to a sidewalk, and they actually came out looking much better than it looked like when they started building them. I have to
Yeah.
give them credit for doing, but it's not consistent. On one side, we have CVS with a nice broad lawn and an inviting general appearance, looking like a suburban area, and across the street you have this 3 or 4 story building with
2 of them.
arm's length reach to the telephone poles and the wires. It
Right.
just doesn't seem as
No.
though it matches.
Even the others that are out near the front of the high school here, where they're built right up to the sidewalk. It just, and if you look across the street from them, it's just totally different. I can remember when I first moved to Burlington, which was a very long time ago, and I can remember telling my mother, and she said, "Where is Burlington? That's on the frontier. You're going too far away." And it was just, it was barely a town. This was a few years before you got here, and it was barely a town. My road was it hadn't even been paved yet. But anyway, and so I've seen change. I really have no excuse for not getting involved. I really don't. And it's late, but you ask, why do I want to get involved? I guess primarily because I just don't want to see the town grow anymore. I want it to level off. I want the taxes to stay where they are. I don't want to see any more businesses. We have every conceivable kind of business in this town. You go up on the Middlesex Turnpike, and I have friends who live close to the Middlesex Turnpike. I listened to one woman, a very dear friend who lives right in that swath of land that we were talking about earlier. She was distressed because of the traffic that is, right near, it just spills off into her area. She was referring to the Dunkin' Donuts and the hotels that are there, and just the traffic in general is just horrendous. And yet, as I drive, I still see more building. And you're telling me now these have all been permitted as of 5 years ago. Are we continuing? Have we reached a plateau, hopefully, where we can rest a little bit? I mean, why destroy this town?
Actually, we have. If you want to arrest that growth, the amount that can be attenuated from now is significantly greater than that which you see has already been permitted, because of what the state planners look for in trends, etc. When I mentioned that there was a study done for where are the most likely development areas, and if you look at that map, there's a little bit in Andover, and there's a large chunk of land set aside in Burlington.
Ernie, I think we have about 20 seconds left here. With that 20
you
seconds
kidding?
left, do you want to mention anything about how you feel about the Mercedes-Benz dealership in the downtown article in 5 seconds?
And asked about it, it's
goes.
an issue worthy of discussion, and it goes to exactly the question that you asked. Do we as a community want to see that?
Okay, well, thank you from Burlington and beyond. We look forward. Next week, we'll get to some state and some national issues as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Ernie.
for joining us.
My pleasure.
Really